Hey Madeline, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. The real question is, can we hear Randy? Because he's the one with the goods.
Yeah. Okay. I haven't heard anybody yet except you.
Yeah, he just stepped away and it looks like he's connected with his phone, which is perfect. I
Okay,
know
good.
I know he had a closing this morning already, and so Creighton was gonna cover and help him out, but it looks like he got it done in time.
Good.
So, yeah, good. Okay, so far I have Susan, Madeline, and Kim who want CE credit. Jana, how about you?
I'm fine. Yes, I already paid you Venmo.
Okay, can you put your name into the chat? Because that's how I track who.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I thought I sent you an email, but that's okay.
Okay, yeah. When I'm like going back later and trying to cross-reference, I always just look at the chat.
Oh, okay. No problem.
We also, with Trek, they want to know that we're like making people pay attention. So I can be like, look, they were in the chat, then that helps too. So thanks, sorry to be a stickler, but that helps. It looks like we've got 4 of you, and I can get the credit input today because I know some of you probably have licenses coming up soon. I'm a little bit worried the class that we were going to do on Friday, I don't think has been CE approved yet. So I think we're going to move it until the CE approval comes through, because I think it'll be a really good class on title objections. One of our momentous underwriters is going to teach it. Because I know we have so many questions about those and they can get pretty complicated. So that's our plan. We'll see if they can get the approval that quickly. But you guys are looking at my screen that has the CE slide, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Good morning, Tessa.
Hey, I'm trying to pay you. Please
Okay.
have $10, write your name and license number in the payment memo Venmo. Oh, I see your little thing. Hold on.
Yeah. Well, and in the chat too, because that helps me keep track. I'm just going to make a list right now. And that way I can just go in right after this class and it'll be updated like immediately.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Tessa, Janice, Susan, Kim, Madeline. I'm going to stop sharing Randy so that you can, okay? And we can't hear you yet. It looks like your phone is muted right now. He may be on an actual call.
Did it work? Did you get my Venmo?
You know, to be honest, I'm less worried about the Venmo than I am about just making sure I have your names in the chat. Obviously, we need the Venmo, but
I got it.
Madeline, Jana, yeah, I've got everyone. Susan and I do it separately, so I think we're good. Okay. I think Randy must be talking to a title client and will join us shortly. Okay, Tessa, Madeline, Susan, Jana, Kim. That is everybody. Okay, so do you guys see while Randy's stuck, do you see this is Zareen's autopilot has joined us? I actually don't need it to be on there, but you know, if you took the ChatGPT course, I did download that Otter app that she talked about, and I used it yesterday to transcribe like this YouTube video that I did not want to watch. And then I put the transcription into ChatGPT and had it summarize it for me, and I was like, this is amazing. It was a very cool tool. So I feel like I have some good new tricks for sure. Randy, we can't hear you. It looked like you were on the phone a second ago. But it also looks like you're not talking. There we go. We've got a good screen share. Welcome, Nikki and Gino and Nora. If you guys want CE credit, will you please put your name and license number into the chat? I know I sound like a broken record. Randy, I'm still waiting to hear you say words. It looks like you're muted.
How about now?
Oh,
Can you hear me?
yes, that's what we need. Yes, sir.
Oh, perfect. Okay. I thought I was muted on my phone because I called in this time because, my computer likes to play tricks. So, all right. Well, it is
Yes.
9:01.
Yes.
We'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking time to join us. We really appreciate it, and it's nice to see your beautiful faces. All right. We'll move on to the next slide, and I'll put this up again at the end, just in case you weren't able to snap a picture of the QR code. All right. Be an expert at the closing table. My name is Randy Ramirez. Most of you know who I am. Those of you who do not, I am your favorite closer at your favorite title company, Momentous Title. So,
Love it.
and here is our agenda for the class. So we're going to be going over the closing process in general, reviewing CDs, brief review of what we call our title company littles that the buyer and seller sign at closing, kind of how closings work, what happens at the table, communication leading up to and after closing, and the best practices to facilitate a smooth closing for everyone. So, and feel free to interrupt at any time with any questions. I don't mind at all.
Yes, the more, I promise you, if you guys have a question, then someone else has it. So please just ask it. That will help everybody.
Oops. I think sorry, my mouse. So what role does a title company play? So we are the researcher and preparer of title work. In our case, title commitments is what we prepare here in Texas. We prepare the additional closing documents, which are the littles, and then we act as the escrow officer between, both parties as well. And we are going to start off with reviewing a CD, which is also known as a closing disclosure. The first one is the seller's closing disclosure. So, and again, feel free to interrupt or chime in if you have any questions. So this particular one may look familiar to you all. So this is a seller's CD. We use the CD if the buyer is obtaining finance, traditional finance like VA, FHA, or conventional. If they're obtaining a hard money or private money loan, we'll use what's called just a regular settlement statement, which we'll review here in a few minutes as well. So at the top, it has, everyone involved, the closing date, settlement agent, property address, sales price. It has the buyer and the seller, references the sales price here at the top. On the right, it's got the brokers and the settlement agent information again. Whoops, sorry. This one was prepared last fall. So you'll notice it has a closing date of December 15th. But at the time this was prepared, taxes were already paid. So we will prorate the credit or charge according to the closing date. So in this particular case, there was a credit there. Today, as of August 8th, if we were closing, we would prorate the taxes from January 1st to the closing date, bill that to the seller, take that amount that we're billing the seller and credit the buyer, because the buyer will be responsible for the full year's taxes when that tax bill comes out in a few months.
So just as pause, as agents, do you guys get that? Like, there's a year's worth of property taxes due, and depending on when closing happens and the tax bill comes, either the buyer or seller is going to have to pay it. So then it gets prorated, right? And I know this is something pretty obvious, but the parties sign an agreement at closing saying, hey, if we, because they prorate using last year's numbers, they have to, unless you guys agree in writing otherwise. If the tax bill comes and it's very different than what was prorated, the buyer who's paid it can go back to the seller and say, hey, you owe me some money. Does that make sense? I want to make sure that you guys understand that enough to be able to like explain it to your clients. Good? Okay.
Fantastic. All right. And so the rest of the remaining portion of the first page, so basically the first page is the summarization of the transaction, and then the following pages are just itemizations. So you'll notice the closing costs associated with this transaction is $16,093. So what I'm going to do is we'll fast forward a minute. And so part of that closing cost is our escrow fee. That's not the correct one. It's actually $550, but this is just an example, but this is where the fees will be found. This is a continuation of the closing statement. So there's a recording fee here, and then commissions are a part of those closing costs, as well as the owner's title policy, which you'll see referenced here. This is a GARC fee, which is basically for every policy that's issued in the state of Texas, we have to charge $450. So if there's a loan on the buyer's side, then the buyer will pay $450 as well. It's just a tax that goes to the state of Texas. And then in addition to the policy here, it looks like they elected to do the T3 coverage and the T19.1, which also kind of goes along with it for the survey. And so if you'll notice at the bottom, that 16,093 matches the number that we had on our first page. So we'll go back there.
Brandy.
So that's where we were.
So we have a question in the chat, like what does GARC stand for?
GARC, I don't know the exact definition.
I will
but
Google.
it's basically it's a tax that goes to the state for every policy that we issue.
It
it's a
stands for
guarantee-
Guarantee Assessment Recoupment Charge.
Yeah,
What is that? Say it again.
I'm gonna put it in the chat.
Okay,
Guaranteed Assessment Recoupment Charge, and it's something that they are required to charge you guys.
So basically, it's a state tax on every transaction, and it's non-negotiable.
correct. Yep, for every title policy that's issued. So in this case, we'll have two. One goes along with the owner's title policy. The other one goes along with the buyer's title policy.
Thank you.
And we had a question too about explaining what coverage is. So Nora, can you I guess you mean when Randy was showing us those like additional endorsements, can you clarify the question a little bit so we can explain?
So I just need a better way to explain it to my clients. So they always ask, what's this coverage? And I say, if there was a mistake in the survey, is that correct? If there's a mistake in the survey. I just want a better explanation.
So you're asking specifically about if they choose that box where the buyer elects to have additional coverage. Okay. Randy, you want to explain that one?
It used to be, Nora, that we didn't have any extra coverage. So now the title company takes responsibility. If the survey was done wrong, then there's insurance that the title insurance will take care of anything if they were like to go in and try to sell it again and the survey was wrong, or there's an easement that was missed. It just protects the client. I highly recommend doing it on every contract.
I think that's a good way to describe. I mean, basically, it's additional coverage that makes your policy stronger because under the base policy, the title company is not going to cover issues with boundaries, encroachments, things like that. And if you opt for this additional coverage, which is not very extensive, then the policy is that much stronger and the buyer does have protection against those issues. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Yep. And Nora, you could always direct, and this goes for everyone, you could always direct those questions to us, and we'll be happy to contact your client and explain. And, you know, we'll get on a conference call with everyone and, you know, be happy to explain that. We do that quite often, so that's no problem at all. And we've actually gone over the, you know, the, excuse me, the closing statement in its entirety over the phone, just because, you know, we do this every day and your clients do not. It's similar when I, you know, go to the doctor once a year and they ask me all these questions, or do you have this form? Do you have, and I'm like, I don't, you know, medical field is outside of my wheelhouse, right? So we're the experts in our field, and we'll be happy to, you know, walk everyone through the statement. All right, so we'll go back.
And
to the
also,
first
Nora, if your
page.
buyers have
Great
a question,
question.
if your clients have a question about something, if your clients have a question about something like that and you're not comfortable explaining it, have Randy reach out and give them a call and walk through any questions that they have, just to give them peace of mind. Like Randy and Creighton will be happy to do that.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Okay, so we reviewed the closing costs. In this particular case, there were property taxes owed for the current year of 2022, so you'll see that line item there, as well as delinquent taxes right underneath there. And if you'll notice, the seller is in an estate. So I've got quite a few years under my belt of dealing with estates. I've got a probate estate attorney who refers deals over to us. So I've learned a lot over the years. So, and as you all know, when we do run a title search, whether it's in an estate or not, if there are any delinquent taxes, it's our responsibility as the settlement agent to make sure that that account is caught up. So whatever the case may be. And this is kind of pennies compared to what I've seen. I've seen almost $100,000 in back taxes on properties before. And we have to, you know, unfortunately, we have to catch those up, and they have to be deducted from the seller's proceeds. So, and of course, when the title search and the tax certificate do come out, you know, we'll alert everyone involved, and, you know, before we get to the closing table. So that way, you know, everyone's aware up front. So, and then, so at the bottom, you'll notice here, we'll take the credits, which is the sales price, and the prorated credit for the county taxes. Take that amount, deduct all of the settlement charges, and then that is where we receive our, you know, cash to the seller. So that's the amount that they'll receive at closing. So, and of course, at closing, we typically send the closing statement out a week before closing, so everyone can review it. We could work out any questions. And so that way, when we get to the closing table, it won't take, you know, but maybe 10 minutes. Because I know, you know, closing date is always a little stressful for them because they've got a lot of things up in the air, you know, movers and whatnot. And so we try to make closing day as easy as possible for them. So including even traveling to, you know, to them for closing if it's more convenient. So I did that just this morning. I had a closing right before this class here in Dallas that I traveled to. And, you know, they were literally in the middle of packing up their house, boxes everywhere. So, and it only took about 20 minutes out of my day to do that. So we're always happy to help. Okay, so moving along. This next one is the closing disclosure for the buyer. So usually 2 to 3 days prior to closing, the lender will provide us with this closing disclosure that they have disclosed to the buyer. And with that, we receive closing instructions and we start the balancing process. And then of course, once we're balanced, Then we contact the buyer, let them know the number that they need to bring to closing, send them our wire instructions. And then, of course, you know, you as the agents are copied on that as well. One thing that is often mistaken is the closing disclosure for the buyer is always provided by the lender. It's never provided by the title company. So if there's any changes that need to be made, if there's a last minute amendment or something, and it alters the amount that they're receiving, let's say they get an additional credit, we have to notify the lender, only because depending on the type of loan that they receive, sometimes they can only receive so much credit at closing. So, and then, you know, things have to be, you know, everyone has to think creatively to figure out how, you know, your buyer is going to receive that credit if it can't be shown on the closing disclosure. Typically, if it's conventional, there aren't really any issues. Where we run into the credit issue is FHA and VA, because they're very strict on the amount that the buyers can get back. But moving along, and again, interrupt me if y'all have any questions. So same thing with the buyer's closing disclosure at the top. It has all of the information as far as regarding the closing, you know, sales price, who's involved, closing date, things like that. So similar to the seller's closing disclosure to the buyers, the first page of the buyer's closing disclosure is a summarization. So this first page is a summarization of their loan. So the loan amount will be listed here. There will be an interest rate, as well as their monthly principal and interest amount of their payments. Where it says estimated total monthly payment, that there will be a, you know, an accurate number there. And if they're paying escrow for taxes and insurance, that will also be referenced there as well. I would note that escrow accounts do not cover HOAs at all. And that I don't think that they ever will. The HOAs are always paid directly to the HOA management company, or if it's a small HOA, it'll go directly to the HOA. And down at the bottom, second line from the bottom, you'll see closing costs. So similar to the closing statement or the seller's closing statement, that is a summarization of the closing costs. And page 2 will show where we come up with that number. So the top of page 2, these are lender costs. You know, typically there's an origination fee, a processing fee, and an underwriting fee. These fees vary depending on the lender and the type of loan it is. Sometimes there's none, sometimes there's, you know, it just all depends. And then if there's a mortgage broker involved, then there's 99% of the time, there's always a broker fee that's referenced here. Typically, the lender will pay the broker fee. That broker fee doesn't necessarily come out of the actual borrower's closing costs. And then in section B, these are more lender fees. You'll see the appraisal listed there. Typically, that's prepaid. So we'll reference that it was paid before closing. You know, general lender fees, the attorney doc prep for the lender who prepares the loan package, you know, credit report fee, flood cert, inspection fee, and tax cert. So you'll notice the lender does their own tax cert as well as us. Even though we send our tax certificate to the lender's required to obtain their own as well. And then moving along to section C, this is where our momentous title fees you'll see. So our escrow fee is split in half. So seller pays half, buyer pays half. You'll see the GARC fee again for $450 there. You'll see the lender's title insurance. So you'll notice the title insurance, it depends on the lender, how it reads. So whenever a title company issues more than one policy, meaning they issue an owner's title policy and they issue a lender's policy, there's what's called a simultaneous issue credit. So since we're issuing an owner's title policy for the buyer and they're getting a loan, the lender's policy is automatically reduced to a flat $100. And then we add the endorsements per the lender's closing instructions to that. So sometimes the lenders will show the lender's policy here on page 2 as a flat $100. Sometimes they'll show the full amount here. And then on page 3, you scroll down, and then on page 3 in here on the left-hand side in section L, right above the option fee. So if they show the full policy on page 2, then on this page, they will show a credit to the buyer for the owner's title policy. So it just kind of depends on how the lender wants it shown. But let's see. So there's the endorsements. So that's basically the top of page 2. So here's the bottom of page 2, where the recording fees for the deed and for the mortgage. Mortgage is also known as the deed of trust. If it's in a state and they did not go through probate and we're recording like an affidavit of heirship, we actually just went through this on Friday. The affidavit of heirship recording fees would be referenced here, and that would be a seller expense, as well as any doc prep fees for that affidavit of heirship.
Hey, Randy.
Moving along, yes.
Real quick, Madeline just wanted me to clarify for everyone else that additional survey coverage is not expensive. So for example, like on $1 million policy, the owner's title policy amount is around $6,000. And that survey endorsement that we're talking about it's 5% of the basic premium. So on $1 million property, it's $278. Just so you guys
Correct.
are aware. You can have some numbers.
Yeah,
It's not very expensive. So 5% of the total premium cost is a good, helps you sleep at night. So thank you, Madeline. That's a good point.
That is a very good question. And I actually had an agent call me about that yesterday because they said the buyer wanted them to, pay the title policy as the seller, of course, but they also were asking the seller to pay for the T3 coverage. And so I just ran numbers real quick, and I think it was like a 1.8. And so it really wasn't. I said, look, here's the amount. And so the agent was relieved that it was, wasn't as expensive as, they thought it was. So
yeah, not worth fighting over, and a number we can easily calculate for you. So don't hesitate to ask.
Exactly. We're always a phone call or a text away. So sorry, excuse me. So under prepaids, if the lender instructs us to pay the homeowner's insurance, that will be listed there as well. It kind of all depends. Sometimes the buyers pay for the homeowner's insurance up front, so we don't reflect it on the closing statement. Sometimes it's reflected in the closing statement. It just kind of all depends. If the lender's charging a per diem interest, that's usually a minimal number on there as well. If the buyers are getting an escrow account, then we will charge a few months up front for the homeowner's insurance and the property taxes for their escrow account. The lenders are really good about cushioning that escrow account. So sometimes the buyers are like, why am I paying so much up front? And so I just explained to them, it's an escrow account. It's going to be padded really well. Once the next tax bill comes out and is paid, the lender will then do basically a review of the escrow account and will make any necessary adjustments to the escrow account. Usually they do that towards the end of Q1, which is typically in March. And also, some clients don't know that the lenders refer to their homeowner's insurance as hazard insurance. They're one and the same. It's just different names for it. And then towards the bottom, in section H, if there are any HOA fees, we'll bill those accordingly, of course, as well as, a survey, if there's any survey required, depending on who's responsible for it in the contract, we'll charge that accordingly as well. And then we always reference any seller paid costs on the lender, always references any seller paid costs like commissions and title insurance referenced here. They don't reference everything because the closing disclosures are supposed to be private. You can't share them like you could, 10 years ago when, we had the HUD statement and it showed everything. So, but it does show a portion of what the seller is responsible for paying per the contracts. So, all right, moving along to page 3. So page 3 here is where the prorations will be referenced as well, for taxes and insurance. In this case, since it's the same, you'll notice the tax credit here. Since we are in August, we would likely be billing the seller and charging them for the taxes in the right-hand side in section N, and then it would be reflected as a credit in section L for the buyer as well. So, and then if you'll notice at the bottom, the bottom right-hand corner, that cash to seller, I always get questions from the buyer. They're like, is that how much the sellers are making? No, it's not, because it doesn't reflect anything, any mortgages or mechanics liens such as, a pool, water softener, things like that. Anything that is owed by the seller in addition to the agreed fees on the contract is not reflected on there. So that's not an accurate number. The left-hand column is an accurate number from the buyer. So in this particular case, the buyer is, owes $35,092.75 for closing. So, and just so y'all know, cash to close, our company policy is we can accept cashier's checks up to $100,000. Anything over $100,000, we require a wire as well. So, and why it's on the brain, we had a buyer a week ago request title be put in their brand new trust. And so we worked with the lender and got it approved and everything. And the same kind of goes with the sellers. If you know that the seller's property is vested in a trust or an LLC, we're always going to ask for the full copies. We've been getting some pushback from the clients on that. And I just let them know that everything is handled with the strictest confidence. It's no different than going to the doctor's office. Everything is 100% confidential. It's not shared publicly with anyone. It is a requirement from the Texas Department of Insurance that we have a copy in our file and that our underwriter reviews and approves the trust agreement. Because as we all know, trust agreements they're all different. No one is prepared the same way. So just wanted to put that out there. And all right, so we're moving along. I think I moved backwards. Let's move forward a little bit. And that really covers the buyer's closing disclosure. The last page will have, all parties involved. And then of course, the signature lines will be there. And yes, I still think Elvis is alive, if anyone's wondering. Huge Elvis fan. Okay. All right, so we're moving along to our cash settlement statement or closing statement. It has a few different names. So again, this one at the top, we include everyone's information, who's involved in the transaction, closing date, etc. This one is a little similar to the old HUD statement in that you can see what, what's being charged because it is a cash transaction. I just included the lender fees on this particular one because we do happen to work with private lenders and hard money lenders. And so in those cases, we would use this closing statement. But you'll see the seller's fees and credits are going to be on the left side. Buyers' debits and credits are going to be on the right side. So pretty simple to review on this one. And moving along, these are just, standard fees. Again, buyer fees on the right-hand side, sellers on the left-hand side as well. And then the last page, so at the bottom, it kind of summarizes everything. So you have the subtotals here, you have the amount due from the borrower here, borrower or buyer, one and the same, and then you have the amount that's due to the seller here. So we'll always send an email regardless of which side. We do the same for both sides. So if you're representing the seller, we're always going to send a settlement statement for them to review, indicating the amount that is due to them at closing, asking them to bring their ID to closing, as well as their wire instructions for the proceeds and where it needs to go. Of course, we'll be happy to write a check, but very rarely do sellers get checks anymore for their proceeds. So, and then same thing for the borrower. We will outline in the email to the borrower how much they owe at closing, depending on the amount. We'll let them know if a cashier's check is permitted or if a wire is required. So, all right. All right, so this is a really good topic. So leasebacks, rents, security deposits on the closing disclosure. So, sorry. So on this one, I've kind of seen it both ways, to be honest with you. On cash transactions, they're typically the leaseback, rent, security deposits are always listed on the closing statement without question. If there's a lender involved, we typically run it by the lender first because we as a title company, we don't mind, we'll put it on there. If it's agreed upon and the leaseback agreement is sent with the executed contract, great. Whatever's agreed upon, it will be on the closing statement. But again, when it comes to the type of loan that the buyer is getting, sometimes the lender doesn't like the leaseback deposit or rent, being put on there. So, but we'll of course let everyone know the moment we know. And like us, the lender does get a copy of the contract, leaseback. So we'll include, I know typically the agents will send that to the loan officer, but we'll also include that information with our title package, with the commitment and the tax certificate, just so they know. And we kind of let them know up front, hey, there's a leaseback and, what the amount is, and just bring it to their attention so we can kind of take care of that ahead of time. So it's not a last minute
questions about this? Because I feel like we do kind of get a lot of questions about charging security deposits and how it works. And I mean, one thing about doing a lease back and charging a security deposit is that you are putting no, that's not fair. The clients are in this situation after closing where they become a landlord and a tenant, right? And if you take a security deposit, you're going to have to follow, Texas law about returning the security deposit. I think it's very important as a buyer to charge a security deposit because that's the only leverage you have when the seller moves out. If they leave a total mess or they cause damage or whatever it is. I know a lot of agents don't like to do it because it's like, oh, no rent, no security deposit, but it's just leaving of course, we manage the process, buyer clients manage the decisions. You just have to explain to them. And also a lot of people may not like to be put in the situation where they do have to like return the security deposit after the fact. So we get a lot of questions about this. Do you guys have any questions, or have you had an issue around this, or is it pretty straightforward and you know how to do it?
So I realized on my last deal that we put a deposit and then it's the new buyers or the new owners. It's not through the title company, it's done between both parties. Is that correct? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Well,
Randy, go ahead.
Go ahead. Nope, ladies first.
No, you go for it.
So we'll do whatever is agreed upon in the leaseback agreement, but once, and I think I'm understanding, correct me if I'm not. So let's say once the leaseback is over and it's time to return the deposit, let's say the house is immaculate and there's no question about them getting the deposit back, that would need to be handled directly between them. The title company would not be involved regarding the deposit being returned. Did that answer your question?
Randy, you hold the deposit.
We do not hold the deposit. So the only time we would if we're required or requested to hold the deposit, we'll have our doc prep attorney prepare an escrow holdback agreement for the leaseback deposit. We'll have
So
it
typically
signed by
what's
both
happening
parties.
is the buyer is getting a credit for the security deposit. Correct, Randy? So it's
Correct.
cash in their pocket that they don't have to bring, as if the seller was paying them a deposit. And that can hurt. That can be a little frustrating for a buyer when the lease is over, because then they have to write a check to the seller. And it's like, why am I writing a check to the seller? But it's because they got this credit at closing for the deposit. If
Correct.
that makes sense.
But if we prefer it to go through the title company, we have that option.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So if it
That's
doesn't,
really the
if
better way
clients
to
don't-
do it, because the buyers, it's just like, then we become mediators. Like, it's just better if they know that there's a third party involved. I would prefer to put it through the title company.
Well, the challenge there is
Oh,
that the
no,
title
no.
company's not going to release it until everybody signs off on the release.
Exactly.
So,
So I think it just makes it more clear cut that this is an expectation at closing, that if you want this deposit back seller, then you need to perform and not, leave the home in disarray. It just keeps them more accountable, I believe, to have a third party involved.
Sure,
Okay,
that
and-
absolutely, you can approach it that way, and if it helps you explain it better, absolutely. But that's also
and
why
we'll
some
be-
lenders may not want to see it, right? Because the buyer's getting a credit at closing. So maybe it's a good
Ex-
point. It's just a little bit of
Exactly.
extra foot, which you guys can definitely finesse. You just need to kind of understand how it works. So that was a good question. And
And
then
when
Janice says,
we,
what if there's a
when-
dispute about the security deposit? So, that's just like any landlord tenant situation, is that under Texas law, a landlord, if they're not going to return the full security deposit, they have to send a letter to the tenant explaining what they're withholding for. And, that's perfectly fine. So that's how that works. So then, to Tessa's point, if you have it in escrow, then both parties are going to have to sign off on it
Mhm,
to get it released.
correct. Absolutely. And so what we'll typically do if we see that there is a lease back, we will get with you and, of course, we'll kind of see what your clients want to do regarding the lease back. And also if there's a lender involved and they do want it shown on the CD, we'll need, the lender's approval, of course. So, but we have a doc prep attorney, and we've done many leasebacks. We've done many escrow holdbacks for leasebacks, sorry. As well as escrow holdbacks for various other things too. So if you need one for, something else, like for example, we've done a escrow holdback because it was on a new build and the builder had a hard time getting the glass for the primary bathroom shower. And so it was a back order issue and everything else was done, but we did the escrow holdback agreement for a certain amount. The terms of the escrow agreement have to be agreed upon between both parties. We just relay that information to our attorney who then prepares the document. So we're not going to provide any kind of advice or time frames. So this is something that the clients have to, come up with on their own. Of course, you are their agent. So we'll kind of leave that part to you guys and we'll just make sure whatever's agreed upon is included on the agreement.
So we
Excuse me, I have a little
recently had
frog
a
in my throat.
situation with it. We recently had a situation with the Briggs agent and it was not momentous title. And the seller had to agree to do a handful of repairs for the buyer and the seller was meticulous and the buyer was meticulous. And the seller only used one particular plumber and that particular plumber was not available until 3 days after closing. And the buyer was acting like it was like the end of the world and like wasn't going to close and all of these things. And I was like, your title company should offer to put the payment for this repair into escrow and then you can still close and then the plumber will be paid directly when the work is done. It wasn't a huge deal to do that. And the listing agent, the buyer's agent was just kind of being a bully and acting like, well, you have to get this done. And it's like, well, you want this specific vendor to do it and they're just not available. And it was just, these things are very doable. Like your title company should be able to help and like guide you through how to execute something like that. It's very, very doable. So if you ever get stressed out, just call us and we can help you out. Hopefully you're closing with us and we will already have suggested it. But if not, these things are fixable.
Absolutely. All right. Moving along. So we're going to do a brief review of the other documents that we sign at closing or that the clients sign at closing. This is called the title company littles. Every title company have these documents in some sort of shape or form. Some have different names. Some are incorporated into, multiple documents might be incorporated into one, but every title company, pretty much has these same documents. So this one is the tax proration agreement, and I'm going to fast forward just a moment because we may not have another one. Hold on one second. All right, so we have a new one actually. We'll update the slide. So for the taxes, we have a tax proration agreement that's signed at closing and just a plain tax agreement. So the proration agreement shows the amount that we used to calculate the taxes. And as Zareen referenced earlier, we use the last known tax bill. So right now we're still using the 2022 tax bill until the current one comes out. Now, if it's a new build and, the buyer wants to go ahead and take care of that now, then they'll need to let us know, which they're usually pretty good about letting us know ahead of time when we send out, because we do send out the title commitment and the tax certificate the moment they're ready. And so what we'll do is we'll then reach out to the tax office, find out what the rate is. And we did this about a month ago. And so even though the 2023 tax rates are still in the proposed stages, the tax office recommended that we use that proposed rate times whatever the sales price was. So that's what we did. Both parties agreed. And so, closing went off without a hitch. The other document that's not listed here is just the tax agreement. Basically states that the seller is responsible for any taxes up to the closing date. So typically, whatever year we're closing, we'll prorate the taxes from January 1st to the closing date. So like, for example, if we're closing today, January 1st to August 8th and then we provide that credit to the buyer. If there are any delinquent taxes that are owed, then we will pay those as well. If there's an estate, and depending on when the seller passed away, there may be rollback taxes, which is something that we'll also bring to your attention. So basically how those work is we'll call the tax office and see how long they're going to roll back. Typically what I've seen is we had one earlier this year where they died in 2019. So they will charge the full amount from 2019 to present. So whatever year that they passed away is the year that the exemption falls off. So, all right. Any questions about property taxes or anything? No? Okay. So we'll move along to the next document, affidavit as to debts and liens. So basically, this is an additional document signed by the seller stating that they're not obligated for any other expenses regarding the property, such as contractors, things like that, because not every contractor knows to file a lien at the property, in the property records down at the county. So this is them, attesting that everything is free and clear. If they have any mortgages, the mortgages will be listed here. Typically, if it's in an estate and the property has been vacant for several years, the city of Dallas, has filed at least one or two liens if they're not keeping the yard up, and they will charge anywhere from $200 to $300 each occurrence each time they have to go out there. So I've seen those anywhere between 10 and 15,000, depending on the severity of the property. So, and then moving along, the next document. This one is for if it's their primary residence. So these are just basically it's like a tax questionnaire. It asks, how long have they lived in the property? Is it more than 2 years? Did they use any portion of the residence for business or rental purposes? It goes on to say, are they married? And then it provides the amount of the exchange of the property and how much they're taking home. And then the last two questions reference the Section 1031 exchange of the IRS code. We typically will know if they acquired it using a Section 1031 because that will show up in the title search. And Section 1031 account is what a lot of investors do. When they're flipping properties, they'll roll over their proceeds into a 1031 exchange account. Then they have so many months to roll those proceeds into another property before paying taxes. So, and then moving along to the next one. So these next two documents are regarding their proceeds. So the sellers, have several options. We can do a check, which can be picked up at our office. We can mail a check, and if they request a check, we typically FedEx, so that way it can be tracked. Depending on where they are, sometimes I deliver checks, or Creighton delivers checks, or Ruth, or we'll send a courier. If they elect a wire, they will be required to fill out the wire form, which includes the name of their bank, their account number, their wire routing number, how their name reads on the account. Their name has to be on the account as well. And the address associated with their account, typically it's wherever they receive their bank statements, and of course the phone number. So we have to have all of that information, and so that way when we send the wire, their bank verifies, that everything matches. So, and the next document, waiver of settlement agent responsibility. So this one basically states we are not responsible for anything regarding basically we're not responsible for the property. And there's another form, another new one that we have with respect to kind of waiving our responsibility is we can't be responsible for the property's condition. We cannot be responsible for anyone occupying the property outside of the contracted seller. And that came about a few years ago. And I actually closed one in Kessler Park. What was it, 2020? It was during COVID, actually, where there were 8 squatters in this house. And the man had been deceased for almost 10 years and was never married, no kids. The house had no running water, no electricity. And, we closed the transaction, but the buyer, he had to go to court and get a court order to have these squatters removed. And so, we as the title company, we don't ever see the property. So we don't know who's occupying it. We don't know, we only know what is, being told to us. So we just have that signed at closing just in case. Now, the properties that we're closing now, we typically don't apply. Those typically happen only in areas of transition. So, but we still include it in our package. All right, the next one is agreement to split proceeds. So if we have a case where the clients are getting divorced and the proceeds are to be split, and let's say the divorce is not final, but they've come to an agreement where, it's either 50-50 or 60-40 or whatever, we not only outline that here on this document, we also outline it on the closing statement. So it's in multiple places, have both parties sign and agree. Also, if we're paying an electrician, a plumber, any sort of contractor at closing, it's referenced on this document as well as the closing statement. If we have an escrow agreement in place to where we're, paying a plumber, like Zareen mentioned earlier, that will be referenced here as well. That way everything is, documented and they can't come back and say, well, I didn't agree to this or I didn't agree to that. So we make sure everything is crystal clear. All right, and then this is just a privacy policy notice from one of our underwriters. So we have 2 underwriters, Stewart Title Guarantee Company and Title Resources Group. Both have a privacy policy notice. They don't give away or sell any of the client's information or your information or anything of that nature. So, all right. This next one is a substitute form 1099-S. So if the property is in a trust or an LLC, or it's an investment property, then we will typically have them fill this out, which has their social and, the information for the property is pre-populated there. So, and moving along to the next one. This one is the Texas disclosure. So the Texas Department of Insurance, who we're regulated by, and who does annual audits of our files. We went through an extensive audit in early May of this year, where they were here for an entire week and they review every single file. So this is one of the documents that's required by TDI. So basically, if there's a loan on the property and we're issuing a title policy, then this document has to be signed by both parties. So references all the parties involved again here, kind of at the first top of the page. It references the owner's title policy, lender's policy, and the endorsements that the lender requires. It also references the brokerages that are involved as well, and any recording fees. And then you'll notice the buyers and the sellers both sign this at closing. So, and the reason why is because customarily in Texas, the seller pays for the owner's title policy as well as the commissions. And even if the buyer is paying for the policy, the seller is still paying for the commission. So they'll still have both referenced. And then the recording fees that the buyer pays are also listed there as well. So. All right, so what happens at closing? So who might be present? So yours truly will be present as the closer. On occasion, depending on the date, you may see my associate Creighton Dipple. He's also another licensed escrow officer on the team. Fill in for me on occasion, just in case we're double booked. You know, everyone's schedule is always a little wild. So we always try to accommodate all of our clients. So, so it will be the closer, it will be the clients, sometimes the loan officer if we're closing the buyer. What does the buyer need to bring? They need to bring their IDs and either their cashier's check or a copy of their wire confirmation from their bank. So we typically encourage buyers, whether they're sending the wire for their loan transaction or if they're paying cash, to try and initiate the wire the day before closing. Depending on their financial institution, it could take them a day or two to get the wire sent, especially if the funds are in an investment account where it needs to go through a couple of channels before it comes to us. So, and what does the seller need to bring? Seller needs to bring their IDs as well as any wire instructions where they would like their proceeds to go. So, and who signs when? We typically schedule closing, according to what's most convenient for the seller and the buyer. So it just kind of depends on whenever they want. We try to get everyone closed as early in the day as possible. So that way, as you'll see the next one, how funding and possession work. So depending on, we're confident in our ability to get everyone signed in and out, in a timely manner. We have no control over the lenders if there's a loan involved, and no control over when it funds. Last Friday, for example, we had both parties, seller and buyer, signed by 10:30. We did not get funding approval until after 4 o'clock. And that's just because the lender was busy, and we kept nudging them, and, we had sellers wanting to know where their money was, and then we had buyers going, can I have the keys? Can I have the keys? So we, of course, kept the agents up to date on both sides of what we were doing. We even had the buyer's agent nudging the loan officer, and we were nudging the loan officer. And so it just kind of all depends really on the lender when they grant us funding approval. Of course, if it's cash, cash transactions are pretty easy. So the, sellers are required to sign in person because the documents that a couple of the documents they sign are recorded in the property records. The buyers on a cash transaction can DocuSign, which in the case this morning for my Highland Park closing, the buyers DocuSigned and they're wiring their funds. So it's a pretty smooth and seamless transaction when it's cash, and we fund the moment all parties have signed and we have funds. So all right.
Anyone have questions about any of this stuff? I mean, it's pretty obvious, but not obvious. It's pretty basic, but it's good refreshers. Any questions? Anything you've ever wondered, but you don't want to ask at a closing when your clients are in front of you? Go for it.
Mm-hmm. And if y'all, and I really appreciate all of Briggs agents across all locations are becoming more and more comfortable with us, which I love. So if you have a needy client or a high maintenance client or a closing that you cannot wait to get done and over with, let us know. We're always on our A game, right? And we're always delivering the white glove service. But if you're comfortable in providing like the backstory, we can kind of, help you out a little bit. If we need to bring in warm cookies from Tiff's Treats or have a bottle of scotch at the closing table, or let us know and we will make it happen. So also, if anytime, everyone's doing a great job of this. If there's any sort of credit to your client, let us know as soon as possible. And then what we'll do is we'll communicate with accounting to make sure that that is reflected on the CDA as well. And also CDAs are another thing. When we send out the closing statement a week before closing, if we see we don't have the CDA, we'll send an email to accounting and CCU and just say, hey, we don't have the CDA for this, please send it over as soon as possible. And then we also send you, those of you who have closed with us, if we wired your proceeds, we keep those on a secure drive for future closing. So you only have to supply those once. But for those of you who close with us the first time, we'll send you a separate email with just you on it. But all of the team members here on Momentous are copied, for you to fill out the wire authorization form. Of course, if you want to check, we'll courier or FedEx or, send the check wherever you'd like in regards to that. So.
Okay, hey guys, it's 10. So time flies when you're having fun.
Sorry guys, I nerd out a little bit. So they're really, I think I've pretty much covered the rest. I mean, this is just sample communication.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think you hit the high points, and if anyone has questions, we are good. You guys saw the list of who I've got for, I can send you those emails. Everyone who attended, I'll send my old template emails. Obviously you have to take them and make your own, but when you have to write the same pre-closing all the time, it just makes sense to have a template that you can kind of tweak every time. So, thank you guys all for coming. Thank you, Randy, for enlightening us and answering our questions. Anyone have anything else?
Of course.
There's the list again of who I've got for CE. Oh, and Gino, I got you too. Anyone
Also,
need
a
anything?
new thing real quick. Oh, go ahead, Zareen. Sorry.
No, go for it. Go.
We just started. We're ramping up on our social media, so you'll notice if you haven't already, please go follow Momentous Title on Instagram. And we just started last week of posting various things from, food to we'll promote and share anybody's open house or Briggs listing. Anytime there's a closing, you'll start seeing, congratulations to certain agents. So anyone who closes with us will be providing that via our Instagram page. So.
Awesome.
And
Thank you so
that's
much,
it.
Randy.
Thank
Thanks,
you
guys.
guys for-
Appreciate ya.
Bye, guys and gals.
Thank you guys. Have a good one.
Thanks.